I'm Matt Gillard, and welcome to another edition of Capital Corner, your weekly news and views on what's happening around early childhood issues, brought to you right here from your state capital in Lansing. I'm joined today by Jeff Timmer from the Sterling Corporation, who's doing some work with the Early Childhood Investment Corporation around early childhood issues. And we're going to talk to you today mostly about the governor's budget proposal. That was the big news certainly this week. Just this morning, the Governor Snyder, Lieutenant Governor Calley, and Budget Director Nixon presented to a joint committee of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees their fiscal year 13 spending plan. There are a number of issues included in their proposal that obviously impact early childhood, and in general, I'd say it was a positive message for early childhood supporters that Governor Snyder and Lieutenant Governor and Budget Director Nixon presented today. For the most part, they're proposing maintaining funding for most early childhood programs. There is some significant increases in some areas that will impact young children and families of young children. They are calling for an increase in the Healthy Kids Dental program. This is a very successful program that it gets more and more kids into or access to dental services, which we know is a precursor to better health outcomes later in life. They also are calling for increased coverage and increased funding for autism coverage. This is a controversial issue that we've addressed sometimes, or we've talked about sometimes in the past, and something that is particularly important to Lieutenant Governor Calley, who has family experience with this disorder. So they're calling on increased funding both on the Medicaid side and then also some specific funds set aside for private insurers to cover autism-related disorders. And so that's something that we'll be watching for or following as the process moves through the legislature. The governor also, in addition to the fiscal year 13 budget that he presented to the legislature, called on the legislature to quickly pass a fiscal year 12 supplemental. If you remember, in the past few weeks, we've been talking a lot about this supplemental. As included in a supplemental request from the early childhood community was $12.5 million for kindergarten entry assessment and a quality rating and improvement system. The governor did specifically call out those two programs to be included in his FY12 supplemental. So we're certainly hoping that the House takes the lead on this and moves quickly, presenting that plan forward onto the Senate and onto the governor's desk so that that money can be directed to these much-needed programs. Those programs would really allow the early childhood community to get moving forward on measurements and data required to really show some outcomes on some of the investments that we're making currently in quality early childhood programs. So overall, I think the budget proposal from the governor was fairly positive and is something that we'll certainly be promoting as this process now moves through the legislature. At this point, I'd like to ask Jeff maybe to comment on his angle from the governor's budget proposal announced today.
Thanks, Matt. What I think we see in this budget proposal that was introduced today is the governor and this administration's commitment not just to early childhood, but to the entire what they call P20 system. And I think this really underscores the commitment we're going to see not just this year, but in future years of this administration as well. And also on a day like this, it's everyone focuses on the money in, money out aspect of the budget, but also where this administration and this governor has been very focused is not so much on the money in and money out, but on the results that are derived from that money. And that's where I think you're going to see continued focus as well. What kind of results, what kind of efficiencies, what kind of effectiveness does the money in these different programs yield?
Thanks, Jeff. I think you're absolutely right. And we've certainly tried from the early childhood community's perspective to focus on that and focus on the economic aspects of investment in quality early childhood programs, and especially calling out the return on investment. And we know, these types of issues and what we can get for every dollar that's invested in quality programs. And I think we've made a concerted effort, and I think we're realizing real bipartisan support for these measures. I mean, the supplemental that we're calling for, or that the governor is calling for, has already passed, at least the early childhood portions, passed the Senate with a 35-3 vote. And so I think specifically the idea that we can get people, legislators and elected officials, and certainly the grassroots communities, to understand that this is not a partisan issue and that these investing in our youngest citizens and families of our youngest citizens is important to Michigan's economic vitality and Michigan's turnaround is important. And I guess my question to you would be, do you think that the governor recognizes that, and is that maybe part of the reason for his continued support for early childhood?
Well, it would certainly seem to be. There, in any effort in Lansing, there's always partisan politics that enters, especially in an election year. But this is the kind of issue that it isn't controversial, and it is bipartisan, as you mentioned. I don't foresee that this is the kind of issue that's going to cause any controversy across the aisle as folks begin to look at this. I think on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, that there's a growing understanding that early childhood investment and early childhood development is one of the best economic development tools that we can use as we look to revitalize the state's economy.
Thank you very much. And thanks for joining us, and please tune in again next week as we explore more in detail the governor's budget proposal and hopefully have some updates on how the supplemental request is proceeding through the legislature.